Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim daf chet. Today's daf is sponsored by Alana and Danny Storch in honor of Rona Fink's birthday. Yom Huledet Sameach and Mazal Tov. May it be a year filled with continued mazal, briut, and bracha for many years to come. Shana Tova. Yes, Shana Tova to everyone. The dapim for Shana are up on the site already, and you can find them. By the time class is over, I will set them up to be organized in order. We weren't in order for the last few days. And you can learn them whenever you have time. There's also some extra shiurim up. Alana's Tanhin shiur went up yesterday about the significance of the blood in the korban, which is a very interesting topic to think about. Why, right? We've been talking about how zrika is the main thing about the blood. Why is the blood so significant? And Daf Mishalahem went up, also dealing with the ideas of kavanah that we've been talking about. So there's while you're cooking, getting ready for Chag, or whatever it might be you're doing today, you can try to listen to some extra shiurim in addition to the extra dapim. Keep you busy. Okay, we're going to start with our daf. We have two main sugyot today. The first one is going to be kind of finishing up, although it's going to take us a long time to finish this up. It's not going to be so simple, which is why there's a study guide to figure out where we get that a chatat we did yesterday. How do we know that? Remember, there's two exceptions to the rule of a korban that's brought shelo lishma, right? For the wrong sake of the wrong korban, we learned, or for the wrong owner, we learned that when it comes to all the other korbanot, it's kasher. It just doesn't work for the owner to fulfill their obligation, which we had a whole, right? We're still keeps lying on his stomach trying to figure this out, right? How could that possibly be? Doesn't make sense. Either it's good and it's good completely, or it's bad and it's bad completely. How do we get in between him and his discussion with Rabbi Eliezer? But then we got back to the two exceptions to the rule. Again, there were four different opinions, but what are the exceptions to the rule? Right now, we're on the first opinion. Pesach and Chatat are exceptions to the rule. Pesach, we brought the psukim yesterday. Now we're going to figure out Chatat. So we just started this yesterday, but Chatat minalan. Dechtiv v'shachat otal chatat. Shetei shchita l'shem chatat. So it says shachat, right? This is in the psukim about this basic chatat offering. Shachat otal chatat. Okay, it has to be slaughtered as a chatat. Now, what we're going to have to do is, if you remember, the big rule in Kodshim, which if you haven't gotten yet, we're going to see a million times. If the Torah says something twice, it means it's ma'akev. It means, right, what does it mean, ma'akev? It's a very important word to understand here. It means that without it, it can't be done. This is essential, necessary. Okay, there's all sorts of words you could use. Cave is the best word, but in English language, we don't have the perfect word to say la'akev, so we'll try to use a bunch of different ones. But it's basically necessary. Without it, you can't have the korban. You can't bring the korban at all. It's disqualified. Okay, that's what it means. If it's ma'akev, then if it doesn't have it, then it's disqualified. So right now we're going to have, okay, and I'm going to pull up the chart already, and then you will see. So what we're going to do here is, okay, we have this chart. What we're going to need to fill in is 8 boxes. Okay, what are we going to have to fill in? Well, there's Shinoi Kodesh and Shinoi Baalim, which by this point we should know what those are, but I'll review just in case. Shinoi Kodesh means you switched which korban it was for. Instead of bringing it as a chatat, you brought it as an olah, for example. Again, what does it mean brought it? Well, that's the 4 possibilities. You slaughtered it, you accepted the blood, okay, I put Kabbalah and Holacha together here. I didn't even write Holacha, but we already learned if Kabbalah, accepting the blood, then also Holacha, taking the blood. So the Gemara doesn't relate to it, which is why I didn't put it, but that also. So Shchita, you're going to need a pasuk for. Kabbalah and Holacha, you're going to need a pasuk for. Zrika, you're going to need a pasuk for, but that's not enough. That's just going to tell you, and I'm going to use the words of the Gemara, lemitzvah. That's just going to tell you you're supposed to do this, but it doesn't mean it's going to be disqualified if you don't do it. Right? Remember, I'm going to go back to, I believe it was Daf Dalid, where we showed all this by shlamim, right? But shlamim is not the same as chatat. Shlamim isn't me'akev, meaning it's not going to be disqualified if you don't have it. So we're going to need a further verse here to teach you that it's ma'akev. Okay? How do we know it's la'akev? That you have to do it this way, and if you don't, it's disqualified. We're going to need a pasuk for that. And you can already see here that there's some boxes missing, empty here, okay? Because we're going to fill them in, but then we're going to be missing. That's why I thought doing it in a chart will really highlight for you what's missing and what's there. So then we're going to have Shinoi Bali. What if you bring the korban as a chatat, but while the person's slaughtering or collecting the blood or sprinkling the blood, they think about they're doing this. Now remember, in this case, it has to be they're thinking that they're going to sprinkle the blood for the wrong person because the blood is where the person comes in because they're getting the atonement from the blood. Apropos what I said about the din and daf this week of Alanis Tanya and Shiur. Basically, we're now going to have to prove shchita, kabbalah, zrika, all need to be done with the intent that they're heading toward sprinkling the blood for the right person. Not only is it necessary, is it a mitzvah, it's good to do, but it's also la'akev. So we're going to need basically 8 psukim, okay, 8 sources, Shiur, Kodesh, and Shiur Baalim, 3 each, one for shchita, zrika, and kabbalah, and a further one to say this is ma'akev. Okay, this is necessary, and if not, it's going to be disqualified. So the Gemara started out, we got 1. Shachat ota lechatat, shtei shchita l'shem chatat. Eshkachan shchita, kabbalah minalan. So where do we get kabbalah from, right? That gave us shchita. What about kabbalah? And again, kabbalah includes zrika, includes holacha, walking the blood to the altar. Tichtiv v'lakacha kohen midam chatat. Okay, the pasuk says it very clearly. The kohen takes from the dam of the chatat. Now we already know it's the chatat because the context of that pasuk is the sin offering. So why repeat the word chatat? Shetei kabbalah l'shem chatat. Again, the lakach, he takes the blood. That's the accepting the blood. Has to be for the sake of the chatat. Okay, now the Gemara keeps reviewing. Okay, eshkachan, you gave us shchita, v'kabbalah. So we got those 2. Zrika minalan, where do we get the sprinkling of the blood? Also has to be lishma. Damakra v'chiper alav kohen mechatato. From his chatat, again, mentioning, right, the atonement, the kiper alav is the atonement. That happens during zrika. So tehei kapara l'shem chatat. Again, the word chatat appears where you don't need it. You could just say chiper alav kohen, and the kohen atones for him. Everybody would know, obviously, through the sin offering. That's what we were talking about. So again, they say, the kapara has to be l'shem chatat. That's why chatat appears there in the pasuk. And with that, we got 3 out of 8. Okay, so we think we're doing well here. But now, the Gemara skips the next box, doesn't talk about the box here of la'akev. How do we know? Without Shiur Kodesh, it's disqualified. And moves on to the other side, skips over shchita and kabbalah and goes straight to zrika. So, eshkachan Shiur Kodesh. So they basically say we covered Shiur Kodesh even though we didn't fully cover it, as you see. And Shiur Baalim minalan. Where are you going to get Shiur Baalim from? That if you do it for the wrong person, it's going to be disqualified. To which they bring a pasuk from Zrika, this pasuk we saw before. Amar ka alav elo chavero. Remember, it says, it's the same pasuk we saw before. Kiper alav hakohen mechatato. That's about the Zrika, the sprinkling of the blood. And it says on him, and not on anybody else. So this means on him, on her, whoever the korban's for, has to be intentionally for them, not for their friend. Okay. Eshkachan lemitzvah. Now here they get to la'akev, but specifically only in Shiur Baalim they ask the question. Eshkachan lemitzvah la'akev minalan. How do we know that it's la'akev, that it has to be that way? That if you don't do the zrika with the intent of that person, the korban's disqualified. As Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yeshua said in a different place, chatat chatato, hachanami chatat chatato. So just like Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yeshua says somewhere else, which we're going to see the somewhere else in a bit, chatat chatato. Also here we're going to darshan chatat chatato. If we wanted the first drasha alav elo chavero, it could. If we wanted the first drasha shetei kapara l'shem chatat, it would have said kiper alav kohen mechatat, right, from the chatat. Why does it say chatato? From his chatat. From there we can darshan chatato. It has to be done for this particular person. Well, now what do we have? We have alav, it has to be done for this particular person, and chatato, it has to be done for this particular person. So we're going to get that it's ma'akev, okay, that it is essential. So there you have the double language, right, where it says something twice. Saying something twice means it's absolutely necessary. So now comes the Gemara and says, Eshkachan mitzvah b'shinoi kodesh, uzrika b'shinoi baalim, bein the mitzvah, bein la'akev. Okay, basically what they're going to do is they're going to summarize this chart, what's here and what's not. And they're going to say, okay, you've gotten mitzvah by Shinoi Kodesh. Remember, mitzvah means you should do it, but it doesn't mean it's disqualified if you don't do it. So that we got from this pasuk and this pasuk and this pasuk, right? We have 3 pasukim, one for shchita, one for kabbalah, one for zrika. That you have to do the korban in the name of the right person. Okay, sorry, in the name of the right korban, with the intent for the right korban, and all the four rituals. Again, Kabbalah includes holacha, so we got to four. That we get. And what you gave us is zrika b'shinoi b'halim. You got to sprinkling the blood has to be done for that person. And there we had bein lamitzvah, bein la'akev. There we had two psukim, so that taught us also that you should do it for mitzvah, and also that if you don't do it, it will be disqualified. But what's missing, and that's why I did this chart, so you could really highlight what's empty here. It's very clear. La'akev b'chol avadot b'shinoi kodesh. So you're missing the shinoi kodesh side, the first side. You're missing the whole issue of la'akev. How do you know that without it, it's disqualified? And b'shar avodot, what are you missing in shar avodot? Well, you're missing shinoi ba'alim bein lamitzvah bein la'akev minalan. You're missing shchita and kabbalah. Now, it's a little tricky here. The chart doesn't show this, but la'akev we only have for zrika because it was a pasuk about sprinkling the blood. So you're going to need shchita and kabbalah the whole 9 yards. You're going to need mitzvah and you're going to need la'akev. So that's what's missing. Now, you might think there's going to be a simple answer to this question, but there isn't. We're going to do this chart 3 times. Okay, we're going to scan the sheet ones, right, for a second. Here's the second time, and here's the third time. Okay, the third time we're going to completely change it. But the first and second time, we're going to basically keep what we have here. Okay, those are givens and those stay. Okay, whatever we filled in already. And we're going to just fill in the blanks. But it's not going to really work out so well. You're going to see. So let's read. Amar Rabbi Yonah. Atem yichatat nazir. So he's going to start with the Shinoi Kodesh, Rabbi Yonah, and he's going to say, oh, I'll tell you how you know that Shinoi Kodesh, changing which sacrifice you're doing it for, is going to disqualify the korban. How so? Because there's another pasuk. Now, where's this pasuk? He's going to take it from a chatat that comes up somewhere else. Okay, we're going to learn about other sin offerings today. One is brought by the nazir. Okay, it's all a question. Why does the nazir bring a chatat? It comes up in the very beginning of the second nazir. You might remember it's because, right, the nazir, well, at least there's one opinion that explains, they're actually taking upon a vow to not drink wine, which is one of the things the nazir can't do. You know, maybe the guy had a problem, couldn't control himself otherwise, had to do that, and that's not a good thing, right? We don't think it's a positive thing to basically be swearing off of wine and things like that. And it's not a value in Judaism. Again, this is one opinion. Not everybody agrees with it, but that's possibly a reason why there's a chatat by a nazir. There's a bunch of chatats that are strange, like also the yoledet brings a sin offering that we talked about recently, right? That's also strange. She didn't do anything wrong for sure, right? I mean, again, some people say she swore in childbirth that she'll never have any other children or something, but really the simple reading is neither the nazir nor the woman did anything wrong, and maybe it's just a different sort of chatat. But okay, let's just leave that issue aside. That's not our main focus. But there is a chatat nazir. And in the chatat nazir it says, in fact, I'll read you the psukim first. In Bamidbar chapter 6, verses 16 and 17. V'ikriva kohen lifnei Hashem, he brings the korban before God. V'asat chatato ve'et olato. And then he does the chatat and the olah. Ve'et al yaseh zevach shlamim. Okay, these are 3 sacrifices the nazir brings. A chatat, an olah, and a shlamim. Al salamatzot, with bread, okay, which are actually matzah. Matzahs come with it, a mincha offering. Vasak, minchato ve'et nisko. And then the kohen does his mincha and his nisachim, the libations. Okay, let's see what they darshan from this. So dichtiv v'ikriva kohen lifnei Hashem va'asa et chatato ve'et olato. What do we learn from asa? Okay, the word asa is very critical here. The word asa means kol. Okay, the way they darshan this, shu kol asiotav l'shem chatat. What we learn from this is all of the things he does, meaning shchita, kabbalah, holacha, and zrika, all have to be et chatato, right? For the name of the chatat. Okay, so that's how they darshan it. Aseh gets us all 3, and chatato gets us his chatat, right? It has to be done specifically as a chatat. If you don't do it as a sin offering, it won't be good. So that's the first drasha, and that teaches us Shinoi Kodesh. You did it for the wrong korban, it will be disqualified in all of the avodot, because that covers also asa, all the asiot, and it has to be l'shem chatat. Eshkachan Shinoi Kodesh, Shinoi Ba'alim Minalan. Okay, so that gets us Shinoi Kodesh. What about the 2 ones we were missing? Shinoi Ba'alim, Shrita, and Kabbalah. How do you know? Again, we need there also that it's a mitzvah and la, okay? Well, we get it from, skip the words in parentheses, Amr Rav Huna Bered Rav Yoshua, this is where he says it. Chatat chatato. Okay, now here it's a different chatat chatato. Also in the Nazir pasuk it said asa et chatato. His chatat. What does his chatat mean? The Nazir's chatat and not in the name of somebody else. And the pasuk also said asa. Asa is going to include now all the avodot, so that can cover shchita and kabbalah all in one, and holacha, because it basically relates to all of them, and it's chatato, which means shinoi baalim. Okay, and that's how we get it. Now, it doesn't really talk about la'akev, but the assumption is that the right we have, if you remember, we had the chatat chatato, which we use by the zrika, and then once we have that ve'asat chatato is all the avodot, then you can take the chatat chatato that appears in, again, it's not chatat chatato, it means the word is made up of, right? It could have said chatat, instead it said chatato. That's an added one. We have two chatat chatatos, and that could teach you la'akev for all of them. Okay, so now we have a possible suggestion, but I already told you we're going to reject this. And that's a very simple rejection, because matkif la ravina elameata olat olatomai darshipe. The pasuk said vasat chatato ve'et olato. Now, this is very strange because the ola, we know if it's done shalol lishma, it's not disqualified, right? So if chatato means you have to do it l'shem chatat, if not, it will be disqualified. And the ola means you have to do it l'shem ola, otherwise it's going to be disqualified. Well, it's not true. So you have a problem. Now, before we get back to that problem, which we're actually not going to answer, but we will just remind you of the problem, they're going to actually ask a question on the question. They're going to say, Ravina, you asked this question, ola, olato. But Liravina, minchat minchato, nesech nisko my darshipahu. And that's why I brought you the second pasuk. Second pasuk said, right, the ayil may do for a zevach shlamim, right, take the ram, offer it as a shlamim. And then it said, asa kohenet minchato vet nisko. And then the kohen does the mincha offering and the libations. Now, nobody thinks that those are going to be disqualified if they're not on the shma. So if Ravina is asking on the ola, why doesn't he ask on the mincha and the nesech? In other words, what does he do with that he didn't even bother asking about that? And the Gemara has an answer for that. They say, oh, that is a totally different drasha. There's a bit of a debate about which pasuk this is referring to, but this comes up in a lot of pasukim because right, you say this in davening and musaf, right? Right? These are all the mincha offerings and the libations that are brought with all sorts of korbanot. Now there it says their minachot and their nisachim, because it's talking about public offerings. Here it's talking about individual offerings, his mincha, his libations. But it actually is darshan for something else entirely, both in the other place and here. Ravina could use this drasha and say what it really means here is the same thing it means there, which is, let's give a little background before we explain. When you bring a korban, you have to do all the parts of the korban, the main parts, that day. You can't leave anything overnight. We've learned about it. Psulina, by leaving it overnight, it's disqualified. And you have to do everything that day, but not everything. So, for example, the mincha and the nisachim, the libations and the meal offerings that go with the sacrifice, first of all, can be done at night. Okay, that's a big chiddush. Usually they're not done at night, and most avodot aren't done at night. And they can even be done tomorrow. It doesn't have to be done that day. Okay, now if you already put it in a sanctified vessel, it would have to be done that day. But if you didn't do anything with it, the korban, these are extra things that have to happen. It could happen later. And why did you learn this from their mincha, their nisachim? Now, you would have thought there means the owner, but actually it means the sacrifices minachot, the sacrifices nisachim, meaning these are accessories to the sacrifices, and they're called accessories to the sacrifices whether or not they happen that day, whether or not they happen later. It could happen later, and they could still be attached to the sacrifice. And that's what it means. And that's why it says, Asako and minchato vet nisko. It means the mincha and the nesech of the offering, and you could do it even tomorrow, or you could even do it at night. Okay, so that's a total aside. Why did Ravina ask only about the mincha, the ola, and not about the mincha and the minchato vet nisko? Fine. But anyway, the Gemara goes back and tells us, Ela olat olato my darshipu. So what's Ravina going to say about that? And furthermore, we have another difficulty. Vitu, that always means another issue. Mi gamre mehadade. How can you learn from nazir to archatat? Chatat chelev michatat nazir lo gamra, sheken yeshim adamim acherim. There's a chumrah by nazir which doesn't exist by the chatat chelev. Chatat chelev is just a classic chatat, which is what we're talking about. But now they call it chatat chelev because they want to differentiate it from chatat nazir. And they say you can't learn one from the other. Why can't you learn one from the other? Because the nazir has three sacrifices, the blood of them, there's blood of three sacrifices. So you could say it has three sacrifices, the blood of three sacrifices. Therefore, we're going to be more strict with it. Right? That's a stringency. Not necessarily you can learn from there to chelev. And chatat nazir, chatat chelev lo gamra. Now, I just want to point out, in order to get to this whole Shiur Kodesh Drashan, Shiur Balim, and all of this together, some of the psukim are from the regular chatat and some from the nazir, and you have to basically combine them all. So that means you're learning from chatat nazir to chelev, which we just said, to the regular chatat, which we just said you can't do. And you're also learning from the regular chatat to the chatat nazir, which also we're going to say you can't do. Why? We all know what's the stringency with chatat chelev. Okay, if you don't remember, you'll remember this in a second as soon as we say it. Chatat nazir mi chatat chelev lo gamer. You can't learn chatat nazir from the regular chatat chelev sheken karet, because someone who sinned with chelev and ate chelev by accident, that's a sin that if they had done it intentionally, it would have karet associated with it. That's much more severe than the nazir who, first of all, we don't even know if the nazir did anything wrong. They're bringing a chatat. It's definitely not as severe as something that has karet associated with it. So that doesn't work. Okay, so we're done with that attempt. Next answer. Ela Amar Rava. So now Rava comes and says, sorry, just finding my place. So Ela Amar Rava. Atya michatat metzora. Okay, you don't want to learn it from Nazir, we'll learn it from Metzora, which, by the way, is going to bring us back to the beginning, because we're going to say Metzora also has Chumrah, and you can't learn one from the other. So we're going to have not the difficulty of Ravina there, of the Olato, why didn't you darshan Olato? But we're going to have the same issue if, this is more severe, and how can you learn one from the other? But let's try it. Dichtiv, what does it say by Metzora? Again, just to remind you, okay, if we go back to the beginning, we're looking to fill in those blanks, right? La'akev and Shinoi Kodesh. Sorry, I can't. La'akev and Shinoi Kodesh, this one, and Shinoi Baalim by Shchita and Kabbalah and Holacha. Okay, that's what we're looking for. So what are we going to do? We're going to fill those in right now. Atya michatat metzora, dichtiv. Va'asa akohen et hachatat. Again, we have asa, which is kol asiotav, all the avodot. That's going to cover everything. And it's going to say chatat again. Asa kohen et chatat. What do you see here? Asa is juxtaposed to chatat. Shiur kol asiotav l'shem chatat. So everything you do has to be l'shem chatat. And there we got Shinoi Baalim la'akev. Esh kachan Shinoi Kodesh. Okay, that covered Shinoi Kodesh la'akev, the one we were missing. What about Shinoi Baalim minale? Which again, we're looking for Shinoi Baalim by Shchita and Kabbalah. Amakra. Now here you don't have the chatato, so you can't say that. Amarka v'chiper al hamitaher. Now, after it says v'asa kohen et hachatat, it says, and he atones for the mitaher. What's the mitaher? The one who's coming to get purified. What do you learn from here? Al hamitaher zeh v'lo al hamitaher chavero. Has to be specifically for the name of that person and not for anyone else. So from there you get all asiotav. By the way, you could really delete this alav v'lo al chavero, even though we're not. But at this point, all the asiyot, which covers shchita, kabbalah, and zrika, all have to be in the name of the person. So that covers that. And la'akev, we have, right, chata chatato. And from there you can say, right, since the asiyah is, right, we can, there, the issue is it's only actually in zrika, but somehow I guess you can say it covers all of them. But anyway, we're going to have a bigger problem, which is akatim yafa me'adade. Okay, again, well, we basically did the exact same thing we did in the previous. It was just different verses. Last time it was from Nazir. This time it was from Metzora. But same problem. Akatim yafa me'adade. Chata chelev mechata Metzora lo yalfish ken yeshim adamim acherim. Chata Metzora has the same problem as Nazir. That it's got its own stringency because the Metzora also brings three sacrifices. And chata Metzora mechata chelev lo gamrish ken karei. And also, you can't learn from chelev, from the regular chata to the Metzora, because again, it has karei. And the Metzora doesn't have anything of karei associated with it. So before they completely dump all of this, they're going to try one last attempt, which is mechada loatya, but te chada mitavote. Okay, I get that you can't learn chatachelev to mitzorah or chatachelev to nazir, and you can't learn mitzorah to chatachelev, and you can't learn nazir to chatachelev. But maybe a combination of two of them could teach you the third. So now we're going to have to go through all the possible permutations. Behelo lichtov, which one are you suggesting that you wouldn't write, that you wouldn't have it say, and you could learn from the others? Well, lo lichtov rachmana b'chatachelev v'tete mehanach. The Torah doesn't need to tell you by chelev, and you could have learned it from the other two. In other words, from some combination, we could learn chelev from the other two. What's that? Well, right, it wouldn't say chelev, but from the combination of nazir and mitzorah. But what's the obvious problem here? No. Malahanach, nazir and mitzorah, sheken yeshimayim damim acharim. You can't say that because those have a chumrah that chatachelev doesn't have. They both have the same chumrah, the one we keep mentioning. They both have lots of dam, because lots of blood, because it's multiple korbanot, and maybe therefore we'll be strict about those, but we can't learn chelev from there. Right? Lo lichter rachmana b'chatat nazir. You understand how this chart would work? It would bring this pasuk, and it would bring this pasuk, right? The pasuk we suggested from nazir, and the pasuk we suggested from there, and then you would get the whole thing la'akev, and then you would get lemitzvah, and then la'akev because you have both, and then from there you could learn to the chelev. But no, you can't do that because they have a special chumrah that doesn't exist by chelev. Okay, next one. Let's try it. Let's try it without nazir and tete mehanach, and then you could learn from chelev and mitzorah. But what's the problem? They also have a chumrah compared to nazir. Malahanach ken ein lahem she'ela. You can't undo it. Remember in nazir, we learned about nazirut. It's a vow. You can always go to a chacham and say, "Listen, I made a mistake. I didn't mean to. I thought nazir was something else." You could try to give some sort of excuse. Chacham could actually undo your nazirut, but you can't undo a sin you did of chelev, and you can't undo leprosy if you have it. It doesn't have this thing. Oh, I go to a chacham and he just says, "Oh yeah, poof." You don't have it. You have to go through a process to atone for your sin in chelev and atone for your leprosy. There's a whole process. Okay, next. What if it didn't say by mitzorah, but we took the chelev and nazir together? Chelev and nazir has its own special korban, and you can't change it for any reason. But the mitzorah, if you remember, has a korban, or maybe you don't remember, but the mitzorah has a korban that depends on how rich or poor you are, just like we saw with the olav yoreh, the sliding scale. Also the mitzorah, if they can't afford this, they bring that. So mitzorah has it's a little bit lighter than the others. So again, you can't learn it for the others because they have a stringency. So with that, we reject, and now we're going to redo the whole thing. Because what we thought was definite, we're now going to shift around. Okay, we're not going to ignore those psukim, but we're going to move them to different places in the chart. You can already see this chart in the third answer already looks different. Okay, so what are we going to do now? We're going to say, Ela Amarkra, Zot HaTorah Lo Ola Mincha. We go back to the original. Where did we learn Shiur Kodesh and Shiur Baalim from? From the Shlamim. And there's a pasuk, Vayikra Zayin Lamed Zayin, that compares all the different korbanot. And it says, right? Lishlamim, and also Lechatat is in there. So what are we going to say? Mashlamim bein Shiur Kodesh bein Shiur Baalim beinan lishma lemitzvah. Av chatat bein Shiur Kodesh bein Shiur Baalim beinan lishma lemitzvah. So what are we going to say? Right? That's going to teach us the whole 6 boxes of the top, okay, which we now combine into one big box, okay, which is shchita, kabbalah, zrika, lemitzvah, the fact that it's important but not yet necessary, right? The first one, that's going to be covered by this hekesh that we do. Whatever is true for shlamim, which is shchita, kabbalah, zrika, you need for the intent of the right korban, and you need for the intent of the right owner. Again, it's not necessary, it'll be kosher if you don't, but it's a lemitzvah that we get from that pasuk, and that covers all them. Now, what are we going to do with these? How do we get la'akev? Well, they say, so hilkach mitzvah mishlamim, v'hanach cry, all those psukim you had before. Okay, again, what are the psukim we had before? I put them on the chart here, but let's just look at the original chart we had. We had shachat ota lechatat, lakach hakohen, v'chiper alav hakohen. That was shchita kabbalah zrika for Shiur Kodesh, and zrika v'shinoi baalim. Let's just stick those all now in the la'akev category, because it wasn't like one was specifically la'akev and one wasn't. La'akev is just once it says something twice. So if you have it from Zot HaTorah Lo Ola Mincha, etc., that's the first mention of it. And now you have on the Shiur Kodesh side, shachat ota lechatat, lakach kohen midam chatat, chiper alav kohen mechatato. You have the 3 that we need. repeat it, la'akev. In the Zrika side, you have to add one thing. On the Shino Balim side, you have only a pasuk for Zrika, so where you're going to learn Shchita and Kabbalah. So basically, Rashi explains that it's so alav lo chavero, that's the drasha, and that's bizrika. But just like we didn't distinguish in shlamim between all the avodot, in other words, since the main law is learned from shlamim and it's shino balim in all the avodot, then once we have one extra mention, even though it's only in zrika, we could assume it's the same across the board. Okay, so that's a bit of a weakness in this, but you could see why they say that. Okay, and by the way, that whole thing is just in the words Hanach Krai La'akev. And all the other psukim we mentioned are La'akev. Okay, so we basically finished the first part of today's daf, okay, which is going to have one added part to it before we get to the next section. But we finished the first main part, which was coming up with all the psukim that tell us that by Chatat, Shino Kodesh and Shino Balim, not only is it a mitzvah, it's also La'akev. And this is our final chart with our answer. Okay, now we're going to move on to a small side question, and then we'll get to our second sugya for today. Okay, well, this was all about the word lechatat, right? That's how we got this from. Chatat avodah zara, dishmiya kol, ubitoy sfatayim, v'tumat mikdash v'kodashav, delo ksiv behu minalan. This was all the chatat chelev. But what about the chata for avodah zarah? Remember from Horayot, those who learned Horayot, right? There's the pasuk. There's a psukim in Vayikra, chapter 4, which is all about the sin offering of the individual, the kohen, all those people. That's we're concerned with right now, the individual, and those were the psukim we quoted right now. But in Bamidbar, chapter 15, there's another pasuk which talks about a chatat. There, it's a different offering, and they learned there in the Gemara that it was specifically talking about a sin of avodah zarah. So we're going to learn that one from. And what about Vayikra, chapter 5? Which talks about the 3 reasons why you bring a korban olav yored, a sliding scale offering, which is also a type of chatat, which is if you heard testimony and you lied and said, I don't know any testimony, and you lied under oath about it, and then you said, oh yeah, I lied, and bitoy sfatayim, you took an oath and then didn't keep it, or you took an oath that was a total lie, and tumat mikdash, right, about something you did in the past, and tumat mikdash v'kodashav, and you went to the temple impure or ate sacrificial meat while you were impure by accident. What about those? How do we know that if you do those, shalol lishma, it's ma'akev, because the pasuk we brought was about chelev. So where are we going to learn that from? Chatat avodah zara atya michatat chelev. Sheken karek kmota. Okay, chatat avodah zara will just learn from chelev, because both of them are associated with things that have to do with a korban. If you did them intentionally, it would be karek. So we can learn one from the other. V'hanach kulu atyam b'mehatzad. And the others we can learn with the b'mehatzad. What's the b'mehatzad? It's the least common denominator between what? The chelev, mitzorah, and nazir. Remember, that was the whole thing. We had these 3. We tried to learn 2 from, right? 2 from the 2. We tried to learn 1 from the other 2. But now we're trying to learn something else completely. We could take the 3 of them together. Now, what we saw from all the chumras is that those 3 chumras are not, right? All the chumras we discussed are not in all 3 of them. It was 2 against 1. So if you take all 3 of them, you can get the least common denominator, which is they're all korbanot chatat, and they're nifsalot b'machshava shelo lishma. If you do them for the wrong, right, for the wrong intent, they're disqualified. From there, you can learn to anything else that's a chatat, like this korban olev yored. Okay, with that, we finish the sugya. Now we're going to move on to something else. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're talking about a Pesach. Okay, moving on to the Pesach shenishchat shelo lishma. Okay, so we have a korban Pesach that's done incorrectly in some way. Okay, maybe the right title isn't exactly shelo lishma, because we'll see. But here's a bright time. Pesach bismano. We're going to distinguish between a korban Pesach. Okay, but what happens here is you have an animal. You designate it for your korban Pesach. But then either it's now your dalid. Okay, again, we'll see this debate later, but in the afternoon or maybe even the whole day of your dalid. Okay, where we call that Pesach bismano, in its time. And then there's, what if I took this animal, and then, obviously you're going to have, I did it lishmo, I did it not lishmo. Okay, let's start with that, and then we'll get to the other. So Pesach bismano, I'm standing on the 14th in the afternoon, and I slaughter that animal lishmo, for the sake of a Pesach. Okay, obviously that's kasher, you don't need me to tell you that. Shelo lishmo pasul. Well, that's the case in the Mishnah. If I did it for the wrong intent of the wrong korban on the 14th, in the afternoon, I slaughter it for the wrong korban, or perhaps in the morning, not our issue right now, but I do it for the sake of the wrong korban, it's disqualified. But here comes the new thing, which is Pesach Bishar yemot hashana lishmo pasul shelo lishmo kasher. If it's any other day of the year. Now, again, what happened? Let's say it was Purim, okay, a month before Pesach. I'm just giving it as a random time. I designate an animal for my Korban Pesach. And then either, you know, I take it the next day or whatever day it is, that day, doesn't matter, before Pesach, or I'm like a month after Pesach, 2 months after Pesach, and I take it, I didn't use it for Pesach for some reason. And I now take the animal that was designated for Pesach and I slaughter it. Now, if I slaughter it lishmo for the sake of a Korban Pesach, disqualified. Okay, because I can't do a Korban Pesach on a day that's not Pesach. Okay, and shelo lishmo, and this is the one we're going to focus on today. If I do it for the sake of a different Korban, it's kasher. Okay, now not only is it kasher, they don't tell you this in the Breita, but it's obvious to them, that you bring it as a shlamim. Why is that? Because a Pesach is a type of shlamim offering. A shlamim is an offering that the owners eat the meat. So a Pesach is a korban that the owners eat the meat. It's a type of shlamim, just like the Toda is a type of shlamim, also the Pesach. So if you do the Pesach, now here's the key. I do it, let's say, as an ola or as a chatat or as right. I have some intent there that's totally incorrect. Whatever it is, I bring it as a shlamim. Okay, that sacrifice, since it's not right, it's Shar Yom Shana. It's not the time when I can bring the Pesach offering. But it is a korban that I designated for a Pesach. But now, as I was slaughtering or sprinkling the blood or whatever I was doing, I did it for the wrong korban. I bring it as a shlamim. So the Gemara wants to know, Menani Mile, where do we get this from? And that's what we're going to deal with today and going into tomorrow. There's a siman, I'm going to skip that, but we're going to start now with the Menani Mile. Amar Avua Dishmua. This is going to be a little bit complicated, a little back and forth. I organize this here in terms of organization. It's possible there's a different way you could organize it. In other words, could be things are not, this is the way I understood it, that there's like, we'll see. Okay, we'll go through it and I'll tell you where I'm a little in doubt, but let's start. Avoid Shmuel says Amar Kran. Now here this is a classic taking a pasuk completely out of context. Im minatzon korbano lezevach shlamim laHashem. Okay, this is in Vayikra Gimel. It sets out, right? If you remember the beginning of Vayikra, if you don't remember, well, you'll remember, you'll learn about this now. In the beginning of Vayikra, it talks about what if you bring a korban ola, and what if you bring an ola from a voluntary offering of a burnt offering, and then if you bring it from this animal, if you bring it from that animal, and then it goes through all the rules. Then it gets in chapter 3 to the shlamim, and it says, if you're bringing it from the tzon, then this is what you do. Okay, so there's different laws, whether it's from the sheep and in the sheep family or in the cattle family. So the pasuk about the sheep family says, "Im minatzon korbano." If your korban is from the tzon, lezevach shlamim laHashem, and it's for a shlamim. So it's basically talking about a korban shlamim. But what do they say here? There's a drasha here. Okay, this is not the simple reading. Davar haba minatzon, an item that comes from sheep, which is what? Korban Pesach. It's brought from the sheep, from the lambs, from the goats, right? It's brought from that family. If from the tzon, meaning that these words, im minatzon, doesn't mean if I decide to bring a korban shlamim from tzon. What this means is sometimes you have a korban Pesach, which is brought, lezevach shlamim, it's slaughtered, it's brought as a korban shlamim, okay? So, meaning, davar haba minatzon, I'm going to read the words again, yehei lezevach shlamim, sometimes a Pesach can morph into a shlamim, okay? And when is that? When the Pesach is brought, not in its time for something, right? And you bring it in the name of the wrong korban, then it's brought as a shlam. So the first question is, if you're going to learn it from this pasuk, maybe it's only if you offer the Pesach as a shlamim. But if you offer the Pesach as an ola, as a chatat, it doesn't make any mention of ola, chatat, asham in these psukim. Maybe it wouldn't be good at all. Maybe it's only sometimes a Pesach is brought as a shlamim when I slaughtered a Pesach and I had in mind, right? When it's not Pesach and I had in mind, I was doing it for a shlamim. So that's weak, right? So the Gemara answers no. I'll tell you how we know all the other korbanot are actually referenced in that pasuk. Amar Rabbi Ila, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, lizevach, lirabot kol zevach. Now the word zevach, sometimes I told you this, sometimes it's used for slaughtering. We've seen that before. Sometimes it's used as a word of sacrifices in general. Lizevach shlamim comes to teach you any zevach, and also shlamim. Okay? So, The Gemara says, so there you have a reference, a word that could kind of be referencing all korbanot. So if all korbanot, right? Again, what does this mean? I brought a Pesach. Now this would include what they're going to say is, wait, ema kol deshachit lehave kimotah. But that would only help you with it. Okay, all other sacrifices are included here. But maybe that means that you could have a Pesach that you thought to do as an Olah, or you thought to do as a Shlamim, and it's not the day of Pesach. So we'll say that korban's good and can be brought. But it doesn't mean it can be brought, it has to be brought as a Shlamim. Maybe you would say, however you, right, since it can't be a Pesach anyway, because it's not Pesach. If you did it as an Olah, you bring it as an Olah. You did it as a Chata, you bring it as a Chata. You did it as a Shlamim, you bring it as a Shlamim. So to the fact that the word Zevach is here only helps us partially. It helps us to understand that any korban that you had in mind that you were doing this will still be brought, but doesn't mean they're all going to be brought as a Shlamim. So for this, and this is where I think it's possible to read the structure of the sugi differently, but I think that basically the next three answers are coming to kind of answer this question, even though when we get to the third answer, we're going to say that actually doesn't resolve this question at all. So that's why I think there's a bit of a weakness in the structure here, but we'll go through it anyway. So the first answer is, if it had said lishlamim korbano lishlamim v'zevach, then I would have said what you said. Bring it as a shlamim or bring it as any other korban. Then I would have said what you just suggested. But lezevach shlamim, right? The focus of that pasuk really is right? If you have minatzon, which we're now saying is the Pesach, if you have a korban Pesach, sometimes you'll do it lezevach shlamim. So the zevach just means other sacrifices, but it'll be lish, right, for the shlamim. The real emphasis on that pasuk is l'shlamim. If it had said l'shlamim v'zevach, then you'd be right. But because it says l'zevach shlamim, zevach is actually coming to define the shlamim. It's what we call smichut in Hebrew, where they're connected, those words. It's not two different words. It's the zevach of the shlamim. So therefore, l'chod shachit la shlamim lehav. So it's really telling you, however you slaughtered it, it's going to be for a shlamim. Okay, it's going to be brought as a shlamim. But now the Gemara says, wait, if you're going to darshan these words, lezevach and shlamim, there's a different way to darshan them, which is, ema lezevach klal. We just said zevach means any sacrifice, and shlamim is specific. Well, then, this should be a klal uprat. Lezevach klal, shlamim prat. And what's the rule about klal uprat? Klal uprat ein bechlal ala masha beprat. Shlamim im midiachrini lo. Right? When you have a klal uprat, what do we say? It's only the prat. Right? You start off general and then you get very specific. Well, then it only relates to the specific things. So that would seem to indicate only shlamim and not any other korban. So that doesn't seem to work. So Amar Rabbi Ila, so the answer to this is La Hashem. Okay, so now they're going to say, oh no, don't worry about that. La Hashem hadar v'kalal. And this is, I put this as a different, this sort of, and here's where it gets a little tricky, the flow. Because this is really answering the difficulty. But in essence, they're saying the first answer was, learn it as l'shlamim and right. Say that because it doesn't say l'shlamim b'zevach, but l'zevach shlamim, that's the real drasha. The problem with that is if you really darshan l'zevach shlamim, you get to a klal uprat, which is antithetical to what we just said. So the second answer is let's darshan it like this. Let's darshan it as a klal upratu klal, because it says say in that pasuk l'zevach shlamim lahashem, and lahashem is again a klal because it's anything you bring to God. Okay, so therefore we're going to have a klal upratu klal, but this is going to be exactly the same structure as the klal upratu klal we had the other day, which is before they even explain the klal upratu klal, we're going to have an attack. Okay, I checked; it wasn't the same person who was matkif in the other case that we had a few dapim ago. I don't remember which daf, but very recently we had a klal upratu klal like this. Matkif la Rav Yehuda min harpakot, but he says halo dami klala batra la klala kami. You might remember this. This was the claim of someone else a few dapim ago. Wait, but the klal in the beginning is not like the klal at the end. You can't do a klal uprat if klal upratu klal. If, by the way, what does klal upratu klal help you? It includes more things. A klal and then prat, when it ends with the specific, it's only the specific. When it comes back and adds in other, right, a general, it means we're going to include more things, and then that would include other sacrifices. But anyway, before we get to that, he's going to say, but wait, you have to have the first klal match the second klal, and they're not. Because klal akama merabe Zevachim betulo. The first klal, lezevach, comes to say any sacrifices, but just sacrifices. What's that? Animals. Klal abatra laHashem. Kol laHashem, afilu la'ofot, afilu la'minachot. Even zevach means things that are slaughtered, actually, specifically slaughtered. That's what we said before. Zevach is slaughtered. But ofot don't get slaughtered. There's malika. It's a unique kind of way that we kill the birds in the temple. And minachot are meal offerings. There's no slaughtering. So the La Hashem includes all sorts of things that are not in the Zevachim, which means in the Zevach, which means you can't learn a klal prat to klal. But the answer there is Hatana de Rabbi Yishmael, but klali prate darish ki agavda. But in the house of Rabbi Yishmael, they didn't care that the klal batra and the klal kama, right? The first and the second match up. They don't care about that. So we can darshan. Okay, so now let's go back to the klal prat to klal. This is our second explanation of this drasha. Klal prat to klal yatadan elakena prat, right? So if you have a klal prat to klal, it's things that are like the prat. Now, what defines shlamim? Ma prat befurash shu lishmo v'kasher, right? The shlamim basically has to be done lishma, and it's going to be kasher, meaning if you do the Pesach, l'shem shlamim, it's going to be kasher, and you're going to do it as, right, then you're going to do it. Av kol shu shelo lishmo kasher. So here you have it. If you do it shelo lishmo, in other words, again, you took a Pesach, you did it either for a shlamim, or you did it for anything else, it's going to be kasher. But they're now going to reject this klal prat to klal because they're going to say this doesn't work. Ima prat meforash davar haba beneder u'benedava. Av kol haba beneder u'benedava. It has to be somewhat similar to the prat. Now, what's similar to what defines a shlamim? You can bring it as a voluntary offering. So you might then conclude from here, if you take the klal prat to klal method of darshaning it, ola u'shlamim in chataf ashamlo. Then you would say only ola and shlamim, which can be brought voluntarily, but not things like chatat and asham. If you did your korban pesach lechatat, it wouldn't work. Or you did it lasham, maybe it wouldn't work because they're not included in this klal prat to klal. So they suggest a different way of darshaning. Okay, so we tried lezevach shlamim. We said no, because that could be turned into a klal prat. But then we said actually it could be a klal prat to klal, and that actually helps us. But then the klal prat to klal doesn't work because it would only include ola and shlamim, and it wouldn't include chatat and asham. So last answer, we'll end with this, and this is going to continue into the next daf. Ela lezevach ribuyahu. Forget the klal prat to klal methodology. Let's use a different type of drasha, which is the word zevach is just a general. We're going to use it to say, oh, just anything generally is included. It's a method of ribuy, just includes a lot of other things that are similar to it, and then we don't have to be so specific. What's the problem? That only resolves one issue. That resolves again, and this really brings us back to the beginning. We already said lezevach lirabot kol zevach, and then we asked the question, but okay, that means if I do any, right, I do this korban pesach, and I do it, it's not pesach now, and I do it l'shem any korban, it will be brought, but ema, why don't we say dechol deshachale lehavi kavateh? Maybe then if I do an ola, it will be brought as an ola, and if I do it as a shlam, it will be brought as a shlam. If I do it as an asham, it will be brought as an asham. So that really didn't help us. It's very nice. It means, okay, it includes all sacrifices. So it overrides this neder and nidava thing. But it doesn't resolve everything because it still might mean we're only going to sacrifice it in that way. So that's the end of our daf. Let's just do a very quick review. So we started with the whole question of chatat minalan, and then we had these gaps in the chart, and then we had to fill them in, and we had 3 attempts to fill in until we figured it out, and then had to reshuffle everything. And that's how we got there. Then we had to get, how do we know also by avodah zarah, by Olav Yored, and that was pretty easy. And then we got to this issue of Pesach. It's Shalom Bizmano, and you slaughter it for the wrong korban. We're going to bring it as a shlamim. And then we're still in the middle of these drashot trying to figure out how exactly do we learn that we bring it as a shlamim. That we finished for today. Wishing everyone Ksivav Chatima Tova, Shana Tova, and this should be a year that brings Besorot Tovot that we desperately are in need of. Wishing everyone a good day and a Chag Sameach.